Okay, so this is my third video. So for this one, we're gonna focus on pages 179 through 181. So I'm gonna go by these one by one and go back and look at the information before as needed. So the weatherman said on television, it's gonna rain, so it will rain today. The first thing I would say is this is a specific person and not a general principle. So I'm gonna say this is inductive. I mean, the strength of this is not... It's somewhat strong because the weatherman has some authority and some expertise, but they're also sometimes wrong. But the same day, it's probably okay. They tend to be wrong further out in time, so I'll do that. The issue here is if you go back, this is actually not true. So since the premises are not true, I have to note that. Key evidence ignored that requires a different conclusion. So maybe I should actually change that to weak, because it would be strong if it was true, but it's not true. It's actually weak because it's not true. Key evidence ignored that requires a different conclusion. I would say yes, because they didn't accurately state the situation correctly. So that for me would be the evidence is not being used correctly. So I'm going to say yes to that. And for that reason, it's not cogent. It's not that they forgot something, it's just that the evidence they used wasn't correct. So I would say they're obviously not considering all the evidence accurately, which affects the cogency. Okay, so with number 2, all medalists are amazing athletes. That's a premise. These people won medals. So it follows that they are amazing athletes. So the two premises, I'm going to say they're both roughly true. I mean, athlete is kind of, it's not the most definitionally strict thing, but if you win a gold medal, you're clearly amazing in some respect athletically, even if you're not great at everything. So this is a deductive argument just because you can tell that the conclusion follows very closely from the premises. So I'm going to say it's deductive. I think this argument works in both validity in terms of following. The conclusion follows from the premises. And then I think also everything seems true here. So that's the soundness as well. So that's deductive. It's valid and sound. Okay, Mark is an introvert. So Mark is a person who likes to be the life of every party. So the premise here is Mark is an introvert. I have no information to kind of counter that. So I think that's okay. The issue here is that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. So I think this is meant to be deductive, actually, just because it looks like this is meant to kind of follow from a definition. The problem is the definition is not being used correctly. So I would actually say I think this is deductive. It's meant to follow from the general principle of what an introvert is. It just doesn't have that correct. So I'm going to say deductive. It's invalid because that's what it means. To not follow. The premise, there's only one premise, and I have no reason to doubt. Yep, it's true. So the premise is true, it's just the construction of the argument doesn't work definitionally. So is it sound or unsound? I think technically, again, he is an introvert, so it's sound, but the argument isn't valid, though. That's the issue with it. Okay, now let's do 4. Either Wookiees are primates or frog dogs. Wookiees are not frog dogs. Therefore, Wookiees are large, hairy, primate-like creatures. So I think this is meant to be deductive as well, just because this is kind of like a classic syllogism setup. So it's supposed to be definitional. The thing here is it's kind of similar to the last one. I don't know why this would be reduced to just 2 options. So in logic, I think they call this a false dichotomy. I'm not sure why we're restricting our choices to just these 2 things. So I think that would make the argument invalid. Are the premises true? Well, again, my main issue is the premise here. I don't actually think this is either or. I don't see why this is the case. So I would actually say that would be, I mean, it is true that they are hairy primate-like creatures, but I just don't agree with how that's been phrased. So it's a little bit confusing. I'm gonna go ahead and say, well, actually, hold on. I think this is valid, my apologies. But the problem is the premises aren't true. So it's valid if this was a true either or. This would be a true conclusion, but the premise itself is misleading. So that's what I think for 4. Okay, so Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of Britain, so she must be a citizen of Ireland. So this is very similar to 3. So she's a Prime Minister, that's true. But this looks like it's meant to be like a definitional, like logical follow-on, but it's just not, because Ireland is a separate country from Great Britain. So I would say this is deductive. This is a little tricky whether it's valid or invalid, because I would say invalid, I guess, because the conclusion doesn't have to follow from the premise. She was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, so I guess that's true. So this one's kind of tricky. It's sound in the sense that there's no lie in the premise. It's not wrong, but the conclusion doesn't follow, so it's not valid. Okay, so we have a list of correspondence here. Okay, can is good. So this is inductive again, because we can see there's a probabilistic statement at the end, and these are all specific people. So this is inductive. I think this is a strong argument because this is many data points. Presumably there's even more. So I think this is fine. True premises. Well, let's just see. This is supposed to be the evidence here. Famous, accomplished. Okay, so it seems to be true based on that. I only know a couple of these people personally, so I'll just follow the lead of the book. Key evidence ignored. Not really, because the standard here is only can, so I don't think there's any evidence to contradict these claims. So I'm going to say no, and because of that, it's going to be cogent. Okay, so Sir Paul McCartney claimed that yesterday came into his head when he was dreaming. Okay, so this is about a specific person. I don't see really general definitional ideas here, so this is inductive. This is kind of interesting. I think it is a strong argument just because people, I guess, are the experts on themselves unless we have other contradicting evidence, but I just don't see that here at all, so I'm gonna call this strong. True premises, let's go back because this is where we find out if it's true. Yeah, it seems like this is an actual true story. So I'm gonna say true premises, key evidence ignored that requires a different conclusion. I don't see any evidence to contradict this. So I'm gonna just say no. If there was a quote from like John Lennon or something saying that this didn't happen, that would be another case, but I don't see that. So that makes me think that this is fine. This is a decent argument. So the last 4 cherry pies I bought from your calendars were fabulous. So the next pie I buy will be fabulous too. So this is like a personal experience. So this is gonna be inductive. This is not definitional like a deductive argument would be. It's inductive. I'm actually gonna say this one's a little borderline, but with inductive arguments, we think kind of probabilistically, and the sample here is only 4. So that's not, it's like better than a couple, 1 or 2, but I would hope this would be a little bit more, like the last 10, then I would say it's strong, but this is kind of borderline. I could see an argument for strong or weak. I'm gonna go with weak, just in this case. So this obviously would rely on one person. Yep, this seems to be true based on the evidence on the previous page. So key evidence ignored that requires a different conclusion. No, because you probably can rely on your own memory. So I think this is fine. So this is a little tricky because The argument I deemed to be somewhat weak, but the cogency just depended on the premises, if I'm not mistaken. So I believe this would be cogent in the sense that there's no evidence that we're missing. Well, actually, let me take a quick look here. So, okay, actually it can't be cogent if it's weak, so I'm going to say not cogent. Even though the premises are true, the weakness means it is not cogent. Okay, so that is all of the problems, and that is the assignment. Thanks for listening.